10-minute jazz lesson, episode 32. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the 10-minute jazz lesson podcast. I am Nick Manella, and we are back with another episode. Now, this is going to be a part 2 of Coltrane changes, and I wasn't going to do a part 2, but then I really thought of something that I should cover. So we're jumping back into Coltrane changes again today. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a second and enjoy the podcast, please jump on iTunes and leave us a rating and review. And please donate to the show. If you're a regular listener, we would love it if you would donate $5 a month. You can find the link on our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. That's the number 10minutejazzlesson.com. And make sure you head there because you can find a lot of cool stuff, our blog and resources section, and our store, which has a lot of really cool, useful items in it. But I want to bring it back around to donating via PayPal monthly. When you go on to donate, there's an option that you can check to make it a monthly donation, and we ask you for $5 a month. That would be so cool of you guys, and that only comes out to $1.25 an episode. So if you think it's worth it, please go on there and donate, and thank you to everybody who has done that so far. We really, really appreciate it. All right, let's jump into today's lesson. So as I mentioned at the top, today is going to be a part 2. So last week we did a little bit on Coltrane changes, and we talked about the Coltrane cycle a little bit. We really related it all back to the tune Giant Steps, and that's typically a great introduction to the Coltrane cycle, and you could really learn a lot about what Coltrane did by simply learning Giant Steps and figuring out what's going on with the changes. But as I got done with that episode, I kind of realized that I wanted to cover the tune Countdown, because that was always the one that, even when I thought I knew what was going on with Coltrane changes, I had a lot of trouble figuring out or making sense of what the heck was going on when I looked at the tune Countdown. Now, for those of you that don't know, Countdown is another tune on the record, Giant Steps, and it's just one of Coltrane's most amazing recorded works. I forget what tempo it's at, but it's well above 300, and Coltrane just rips it up. He plays unbelievable material at one of the fastest tempos that you will hear anybody play at. It's totally clean. If you haven't gone out and checked it out, I suggest you do that today. In fact, do it before you listen to the rest of this podcast, because then you're going to understand a little bit more what I'm talking about if you have the sound of the tune Countdown in your ears, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. And before I get into this, I've been forgetting to do this a lot lately. Make sure that you go to the website, find episode number 32, and download the PDF that goes along with this, because it's really important you have it in front of you while you're listening. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a review of Coltrane changes. So remember, we said what the Coltrane cycle is a series of 3 major keys that descend by major thirds, and then what happens is, in between those keys, you get the 5-7 chord, or the dominant chord, of each one of those major keys. So let's start with the first chord progression in Countdown. So we're looking at these 3 keys: B flat major, G flat major, and then ultimately our target is D major. So we start on B flat major, we go down a major third, which brings us to G flat major, then we go down another major third, which brings us to D major. Okay, so I'm just trying to put that back in your head. If you haven't listened to last week's episode and you have no idea what the Coltrane cycle is, go and check that out first. All right, so let's talk about a little bit of the differences between Giant Steps and Countdown. So the very first thing that you will notice in Countdown that there isn't in Giant Steps is that our whole cycle actually starts off with a minor 7 chord. And I remember that when I was younger, that minor 7 chord is what really threw me for a loop. I couldn't really figure out how the cycle started when it started on a minor 7 chord. In giant steps, we don't see that. It basically just goes straight through the cycle without any kind of derivations or differences than the core Coltrane cycle. So what we're going to talk about is how does Countdown do this a little bit differently. So the first thing that we need to do, and I want you to have your example sheet out in front of you where I've actually written down the chord changes to Countdown, and I've put some notes in there to make it a little bit clearer about what's going on. So we're going to look at measure 1, all right? Starts off with an E minor 7 chord, and that's the one that will get you. But you'll notice in the little box I have over that one, the first chord in the tune, I have 2 written in there in Roman numerals, okay? So just know that that's a 2 chord, all right? Now I want you to jump to the second chord in measure 3, and you'll see that that's an A7 chord, all right? And then in a little box above that, I have written 5, the Roman numeral 5. Now go to the next chord, which is D major. Now you'll notice in the box above that chord, I have the Roman numeral 1. So if you look at that first chord, E minor 7, you get 2. If you jump all the way to that A7, you get 5. And then if you jump to the D major 7, you get 1. So what is that? That's a 2, 5, 1, right? Now, what we need to deal with and what makes it a lot more complicated than a regular 2, 5, 1 are all the chords in between. And what you'll notice is when you look at it, that is the Coltrane cycle. So the Coltrane cycle really starts on beat 3 of measure 1 with our F7 chord. Now you see I've also written some more notes in the boxes underneath the staff. And what we have is, so we have E minor 7 is the first chord. Then we have F7. Now that is becoming the 5 chord or the dominant chord of the B flat major 7 chord that we're going to go to in measure 2. So we have the F7 followed by the B flat major 7. There's the first major chord of our Coltrane cycle, all right? Then we go from the B flat major chord to the D flat 7 chord, which is our dominant of G flat, which is the next chord that we're going to. So you'll notice that starting on beat 3 of measure 1, it starts to look a lot more like giant steps, and it will start to make sense. So if you remove that first minor chord, it starts to look like giant steps, something a little bit more familiar or hopefully more familiar. Okay, so now we're on the G flat major 7 chord. Then we move to an A7 chord, which is the 5 or the dominant of D major, right? And then we complete the cycle. So really what Coltrane did was he took a regular 2-5-1 and he put his Coltrane cycle into that 2-5-1 to make it sound the way that he wanted to. So he could play all of his, quote unquote Coltrane stuff over that. And it makes for just a really, really interesting set of chord changes. But again, it's more complicated when you see that minor chord. So then if we look at measure 5, we're doing this entire cycle again, but in a different key. So you have the D minor chord, which functions as the 2. Jump all the way to the G7 chord, which functions as the 5, and our goal key is the C major 7. But in between, we go from the key of A flat major to the key of E major, and then to the key of C major. Now, if you jump down to measure 9, we do the exact same cycle, but in the key of B flat major. So basically, this is taking this superimposed cycle over the 2-5-1 and is doing it in 3 different keys. Okay? Now, it's said that Coltrane used the tune up to come up with Countdown. And Coltrane did that a lot when he was developing his own way of getting through all these chords. He really took a bunch of tunes and basically reharmonized them. Took a bunch of his favorite tunes, dissected them, and figured out where he could superimpose the sounds that were in his head over the tunes that he already knew. And he did this with a multitude of tunes. If you go on Google and you type in Coltrane reharmonization, it will bring up a bunch of these different tunes, and you can go back through and listen to all these tunes that you knew that he took and kind of flipped on their head and really furthered jazz with the way that he was reharmonizing these. Now, if you go and you compare Countdown to Tune Up, you're going to see a bunch of chord substitutions that if you want to play really, really out, you can superimpose some of this stuff over Tune Up. And hopefully your rhythm section is good enough to hear what you're doing and kind of follow along with you. But sometimes that can be tough. All right, that does it for this week's lesson. I know this can be complicated. If you have any questions at all, please email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Remember to go and check out the website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Go to our store. Please donate every month, $5 or whatever you can afford, even if it's only $1. Please go on to that PayPal and hit recurring donation, and it will take that money every single month. We really appreciate it, and we'll catch you all next week. I hope you have a great week, everybody.